following program contains disturbing images and violent scenes.
The following program contains flashing images.
A brutal homicide in Springfield, Illinois. A young wife and mother is murdered in cold blood.
Somebody beat Donna to death with a hammer.
The evidence points to a crazed attacker, slain at the scene by his victim's husband.
You leave my wife. I shot him.
Mark Winger was viewed as a hero.
But is the case closed, or is a killer still out there?
It didn't sit right with me. It was a gut feeling, it was an instinct.
Only forensic science can separate fact from fiction. This dramatic reconstruction is based on eyewitness accounts, police evidence, and court records.
I don't know who he is. He's still inside the house?
On August 29th, 1995, at 4:30 p.m., Detectives Charlie Cox and Doug Williamson are informed of an incident at the home of Springfield resident Mark Winger.
We got a call from dispatch of a intruder and a shooting, and possibly one of the persons was dead.
Right, we're on our way. Let's go. Give me a second. No, let's go now.
This is a call that is out of the ordinary for even a police emergency call. We could tell that just by the way it was dispatched.
It's very unusual to have a call of a homicide in the west end of town.
As detectives rush to the residence, paramedics are already on the scene.
Okay, sir, we're here. We're gonna take care of her. We gotta clear out, okay? We need as much room for her as we can. All right, take the head. Dear, can you hear me? She's got a pulse.
Next to arrive is Officer Dave Berenger. He'd been warned by dispatch there was a man in the house with a gun. What he finds is even more alarming.
I saw a lady on the floor, non-responsive.
Sir, can you hear me?
And then just 5 feet away from her, I saw a gentleman laying on the carpet. He looked like he had a severe head injury. I realized that they're going to probably load and run. So I knew that detectives would never have an opportunity to see exactly what the crime scene looked like before they got there. I ran out to the back of my car, and I remembered I had my Polaroid camera in the trunk. I grabbed it, I ran back into the house, and I immediately snapped 3 pictures. I wanted to show the correlation between where the two of them were lying in relationship to each other, in relationship to a hammer that was laying on the carpet next to the gentleman. And then I realized that was my last picture. I only had 3 pictures in the camera at the time.
10 minutes later, detectives Cox and Williamson finally make it to 2305 Westview Drive.
Took us a little bit longer than we would have liked to get there.
When things are happening like that, it seems like everything's moving in slow motion. You just can't get there quick enough.
When we first arrived at the home, it was shocking to me that the female was still alive. I could see the pools of blood. I could also see the blood in the female's hair. And as I looked initially around that room, in my point of view, we were looking at a homicide investigation.
Come on, stay with me, buddy, stay with me.
Cox evaluates the scene as paramedics race to save the victims. For the former CSI, this chaos means trouble.
How's that bag?
Any crime scene investigator wants 0 people in his crime scene when he gets there. We had quite a few ambulance personnel working on the victims. It changes the crime scene dramatically.
In the midst of the disruption, detectives attempt to piece together the puzzle.
The information I was given that the male subject on the floor was the perpetrator who had beat the female subject, Donna Wingert, with a hammer.
We know who this is?
I'm not sure.
I reached down into his back pocket and got his wallet.
And inside that wallet was identification that positively identified the person that had been shot in the head. And that turned out to be Roger Harrington.
Once I knew who he was, I went back to start interviewing the husband, Mark Winger.
With two people fighting for life just outside the door,
Mr. Winger.
the detectives begin their search for answers.
Mr. Winger, this is Detective Cox.
He was visibly upset and constantly wanting to know if his wife was going to make it, if she was all right.
She's fighting very hard, sir. She's still alive. They're working on her now.
Who's that man? Who's that guy over there?
Sir,
He continually tried to ask me what was going on, what we were doing, who's that man in there on my floor.
The distraught husband is in a state of shock.
I offered him some Kleenex, and I'm trying to calm him down at that point. He asked if he can have a soda.
I think there's one in the fridge.
As I approach the refrigerator, I can see that there is yellow notebook paper with some writing on it.
It's a complaint letter to a local transport service detailing a traumatic cab ride Donna Winger had taken a week before. Williamson returns with the soda as Donna and Roger Harrington are rushed to hospital.
Nice and easy.
Now Mark Winger tells detectives what happened. A brutal attack at the home of Springfield, Illinois resident Mark Winger has left his wife and her apparent attacker both clinging to life. Mark, a nuclear engineer, and Donna, a nurse, are a successful couple who recently adopted a child, 3-month-old Bailey.
She wanted a child. Oh my God, she was so excited. They went every route to explore that there was before adoption. The excitement of having Bailey in her arms made a huge difference.
Go 1, 2, 3. Good.
They're taking your wife to the hospital now. Mr. Winger, I'm gonna need to ask you some questions. Tell me from the beginning what happened.
I was downstairs.
He stated that he was running on a treadmill, and he heard some type of a thud or a thump.
Honey? You all right? Honey?
He came up the steps from the basement into the master bedroom.
My baby was lying there in the bed by himself. I got worried.
He went over to a nightstand in the top drawer where he had his firearm. It's a semi-automatic handgun. He began to come down the main hallway towards the dining room when he observed a male individual leaning over his wife, beating her in the head with a hammer. He fired one shot, striking the intruder in the top of the head. The intruder fell backwards. Mr. Winger saw the intruder get back up off of his shoulders, and he fired a second shot, striking him in the forehead.
Oh, God, Donna! What did he do to you? Oh, my God.
Tell me about the hammer. Did you touch the hammer?
The weapon that was used to kill Donna Winger was a hammer from inside the home.
He was supposed to hang a hat rack for his wife. So on that particular day, she had put the hat rack on a dining room table as well as a hammer as a subtle hint for him to get it done.
It was lying there.
Roger Harrington was on the floor moaning and groaning. Mark grabbed the hammer because he was so pissed that his wife was dying, and this guy's over here still alive, so he struck Mr. Harrington in the chest twice to shut him up.
Mr. Winger at that point said that he called 911.
Emergency. This man he my wife. I shot him.
Is he dead?
I don't know. He's making weird sounds. My baby's crying.
My baby. I gotta check my baby. It's okay. You're gonna be okay. Everything's gonna be okay.
This is the police department. We've got officers en route. They need to know what's going on.
My wife is dying on the floor.
Okay, we've got people on the way.
Okay.
Who is this man?
I don't know who he is. Please just let me get to my wife. I won't hang up. Okay.
Okay. Is that up?
Oh, God.
Now it's Mark Winger's turn to ask questions.
Please tell me. Who's that guy that tried to kill my wife?
His name's Roger Harrington.
Oh my God. That guy's been harassing us all week.
Detectives learn Donna Winger's assailant is no random stranger.
Donna Winger had hired BART Transportation to drive her from St. Louis, Missouri, back to Springfield, Illinois after a trip to Florida.
The cab provided was driven by Roger Harrington.
Do you know Dom?
Who?
Dom.
Harrington talked of his spirit guide, Dom,
He's my spirit guide.
as well as wild sex parties.
You know, maybe we can get together later in the week if you like.
He also was driving at an excessive speed.
Do you mind slowing down?
Oh, you're fine. I'm a really safe driver.
Donna had her baby with her at the time, and not only was she in fear for her safety, but also for her child.
When Mark Winger heard the details of his wife's ride home, he was furious.
Mr. Winger called BART Transportation and filed a complaint. Subsequently, Roger got released from his job.
The story sounds familiar to Detective Williamson.
I knew at that point that Donna had documented that trip in the note that was hanging on the refrigerator.
And the name Roger Harrington rings a bell with Charlie Cox.
I had actually dealt with Roger Harrington in the past. I used to own a mobile home park in town, and his girlfriend at that time were living in one of the mobile homes that I rented. And I had, on 2 occasions, had to go to the mobile home and break up disturbances between the two.
This is the laziest you settle down! You outside!
He had not caused any physical harm to her, but he was capable at that time of becoming quite violent and snapping very quickly. So the information that Mark Winger was providing and the information that I already had helped me form the opinion that it's very possible that this guy did as Mr. Winger had told us he had done.
While Cox continues interviewing Winger, Williamson takes a look outside.
When I came out of the house, I saw a very dirty, cruddy car that you could tell did not belong in that neighborhood. And I asked if anybody had run the license plate yet. It came back to Roger Harrington. I could see that there was a note on the front seat, and then upon a more thorough search through the car, I saw that there were several items in the car that could be used as a weapon. There was a knife in there. There was a tire iron that was fashioned with some tape around the handle, fashioned as a weapon.
The evidence is adding up. A car full of weapons, a violent suspect, and a young mother who paid the price for his madness. Back inside, CSI Norval Milton begins his examination of the scene.
My best description for the scene was basically a disaster. There was a lot of medical type things spread all over the scene. There was a hammer laying on the floor. On the wall was blood spatter. There was a large pool of blood where Mrs. Winger had been laying. There was another pool of blood where Mr. Harrington had been laying. I cut out one section of carpet where Mr. Harrington was laying, and underneath that was a spent projectile from the .45 caliber handgun.
Mark said he shot him right in the forehead, and the bullet hole that went through the forehead went all the way through his head and lodged into the floor underneath him. So where he was laying was where that shot had occurred.
Shell casings that we found on the floor were collected. The .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol that belonged to Mr. Winger, that was laying on the kitchen table. It was bagged.
We double-checked to make sure that any clothing that had been cut off the victims had been retrieved. We went over that crime scene with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that we had everything, because many times there's no other opportunity to go back and find that evidence.
Detectives see no signs of forced entry into the house.
Looks all good.
They assume the door was locked, and that Donna must have left the baby alone when she went to answer it.
Hi.
Hi.
I'd prefer not to talk to you. Let me get my husband.
Once inside, Harrington's madness must have turned to rage. Cox and Williamson canvassed the neighborhood to learn more about the Wingers' home life.
We talked to all of the neighbors that we could in that block to see if they had heard or seen anything. Were there any issues inside the marriage of Mark and Donna?
They believed that Donna and Mark had a good marriage, that everything was going good in their life at that time. They had just adopted Bailey. They were both ecstatic about being new parents, and just everything was perfect in their life.
As Cox and Williamson continue to piece things together, terrible news arrives. Despite the best efforts of medical personnel, Donna Winger has succumbed to her injuries. The wife and new mother is dead.
I got a call from my daughter, Michelle. She said, Donna was murdered today, Dad. Somebody beat Donna to death with a hammer. I remember throwing the phone down and standing there and screaming. And I knew that my life would never be the same again.
Donna's attacker is also dead, felled by 2 bullets fired by Mark Winger. News of a crazed killer rips through Springfield like a shockwave. Detectives take a closer look at their only suspect. Harrington had a long history of mental illness. That same evening, they turned to family friend Deanne Schultz to learn more about Donna's troubling ride home with a psychopath.
Deanne indicated that she was the best friend to Donna Winger, that they were very close.
She told me about that bizarre limo ride she had the week before.
Here, let me help you.
No, I'm okay.
Is everything okay?
I'm fine. Please just get my case.
I insisted she call the police about it because she was very, very terrified.
Deanne Schultz had called the Springfield Police Department, and they had asked to have a premise check put on the residence.
And she is the one who told us about the hang-up phone calls.
She got some crank calls at the house. In fact, I picked up one of the calls myself.
Oh, I'll get that.
Thanks.
Hello? Hello?
Is Mrs. Winger there?
Yes, who is this?
She could tell by the person's voice and demeanor that the person was mentally ill.
I just can't believe he did this to her. She had Mark, and they had just gotten Bailey, and she had so much to live for.
Everything detectives see and hear implicates Roger Harrington as the killer. Officers are sent to Harrington's trailer to gather additional evidence.
Sorry, ma'am. Sorry to disturb you.
His longtime roommate insists that Roger is innocent.
He told me the winger got him fired and told Roger to come by and work it out if he wanted his job back.
Roger Harrington?
When challenged with this statement, Winger explains that he called to sort things out. But Harrington spoke only of his spirit guide.
Dom thought your wife was beautiful and told me to tell her so.
Frustrated, Mark hung up. Inside the trailer, police find hard evidence of Harrington's madness.
One of the officers, he actually brought back a Halloween mask, and that was supposedly Dom that he talked to and made him do all these bad and weird things. It was decided that the evidence pretty much lined up with what Mr. Winger was telling us. The physical evidence that we seen at the time, meaning the blood stains on the carpet, matched up with his story, where the perpetrator ended up. There was still things that bothered us, but there always is, little things, but not enough to warrant leaving the case open. But there was a lot of things that was bothering Doug.
When I first saw Mark Winger, it just seemed like something was wrong with the way he was acting. He would give the indication that he was crying. As a matter of fact, I offered him some Kleenex. I saw that he had no tears.
Winger's dry eyes weren't the only thing that puzzled Williamson.
I saw that he had a white T-shirt wrapped around his left hand.
This shirt is the one Winger wore throughout the attack.
He had already cleaned up before we got there. He had changed his clothing already.
Mr. Winger, they're taking your wife to the hospital now.
Despite Winger's apparent distress, something didn't add up.
We told Mark Winger several times, Donna is still alive. She has been taken to the hospital. They are working on her. She is still alive. And he never, ever asked for us to drive him there or to go to the hospital to be with his wife. And that was odd.
But it was a simple request that sounded the loudest alarm.
Could you get me a soda? I think there's one in the fridge.
Sure. I believe that Mark sent me to get that soda so I would read that note, because that is the motive that explains who is laying on the dining room floor. So there were some indicators to me that just didn't sit well.
The rookie becomes determined to continue the investigation. But his tenacity will soon pit him against his partner, his fellow officers, and the entire Springfield establishment.
It's a very brave thing you did, sir. You're a real hero.
Overnight, there is an outpouring of support for grieving widower Mark Winger. The community applauds his courage.
Mark Winger was viewed as a hero for killing this intruder that was beating his wife.
In grateful response to the tide of well-wishers, Winger writes a letter to the local paper, thanking the entire town.
It was apparent to me that everyone believed that Mark Winger was a hero in this case, and that the case would be closed within a matter of a day or two.
But Detective Williamson remains unconvinced, and his doubts are strengthened by the physical evidence.
When I observed the car parked on the street facing the wrong way in front of the Winger residence, it was a very good indication to me that the person driving that was not trying to be inconspicuous. Upon looking inside, it did have a handwritten note on the front seat that appeared to indicate that there was a meeting with Mark Winger at 4:30.
The weapons in the car also raise questions.
Roger Harrington had access to weapons and would have entered the house with those, but we were supposed to believe that he just happened to have the luck that a hammer was laying on that table and that he hit Donna in the head, killing her.
Williamson also finds it difficult to fathom why Donna would leave her baby alone on the bed and let a man she feared into her home.
You know, there's always an explanation. Well, maybe Donna saw him and, she's easygoing. She let him in, figured Mark would take care of it.
But that could all be explained away if he went in to talk and snapped it and just used a weapon of opportunity there.
All right, Charlie, anytime you're ready.
Williamson is relentless in his efforts to keep the investigation open. Cox even indulges him in his assertion that Winger could not have heard a thumping noise from upstairs if he had the treadmill going.
He's the type of person that don't like loose ends. It bothers him all the time.
Now, Charlie, I can't hear anything down here.
Detective Cox and I were at odds about what the crime scene told us.
There's just too many unanswered questions here. There are always going to be unanswered questions.
Doug hits on a lot of little things. It's not that his concerns aren't important. It's that sometimes they don't mean everything he thinks they mean.
We got to move on because we got other things on our plate.
He basically said, no, you're wrong.
Well, this was my case, and it was closed in a matter of a day.
Great. Justifiable homicide. Thanks very much. Let's go.
It's not right, Charlie.
A grieving Mark Winger buries his wife, hires a nanny to care for his motherless daughter, and tries to move on.
Harrington is there to murder somebody. Why does he park his car outside?
Doug Williamson does not.
I would talk him down and tell him it's over, you know, it's done, leave it go. I said, you're killing yourself here, not getting any sleep, and you're going to end up with ulcers. And I said, just let it go. There's always things you can't answer in a case. You just got to let them go.
He had motive. He was crazy. He was furious with them. Husband had no reason.
The fact that I was a rookie and had very little experience compared to others, my opinions were discounted fairly quickly.
Winger is acting too suspicious, and there's too many loose ends on Harrington.
I vividly remember not only that they were discounted, but I was ridiculed over them.
Everybody's moved on in this case, except you. Let it go.
It was a gut feeling, it was an instinct, but I had reasons to back that up.
Despite Williamson's protests, the case file remains closed. But the story isn't over. Several weeks after the murder, Mark Winger makes contact with Charlie Cox.
Mr. Winger, hello. Well, there's really nothing more to say. The case is closed.
I felt like he was pumping me to find out if we had opened it back up or if we were still looking into it.
Even as a new homicide investigator, one of the things that is very basic in the training is you always look to see why people are injecting themselves into the investigation.
Okay. Well, thanks for calling. Have a good afternoon.
So I just told him, no, it's closed. It's been closed. As far as, you know, I'm concerned, you're still my hero. A month or two after that, he come back in again.
I was just kind of in the neighborhood, so I thought I'd stop by.
Good.
I had never experienced anyone come in and talk to me for that long that was involved in a homicide case. Usually you never hear from any of them again. There didn't seem to be any sadness in him.
Is there anything I can do for you?
How would I go about getting my gun back?
Your gun?
It was a gift.
I see.
We got a release from, was able to release the gun to him.
I gotta go check on Bailey.
Right.
Thanks again.
Okay.
I immediately got a hold of Doug and told him, you know, something isn't right.
That is the straw that broke the camel's back to prove to Detective Cox that Mark Winger was lying. To me, that didn't mean anything. Him asking for the gun back did not mean anything. It doesn't to this day. To Detective Cox, that meant everything.
So we went to the bosses. It was a hard case to reopen because first I had to come out and admit that I was wrong in the conclusions that I had drawn.
It's just a hunch. You know, we haven't got a lot of evidence, but
They said, no, it's just a gut feeling. You don't have nothing concrete here. We're not going to let you embarrass this man because of his stature in the community.
We blamed the wrong guy. We can find the evidence.
Our case is closed. Anything else?
Reluctantly, the pair concede their case is circumstantial at best. Without hard evidence, a new investigation is impossible. Time moves on. A year after the murder, Mark Winger puts the tragedy behind him, marrying Bailey's nanny and starting a new family. Cox and Williamson remain stalled in their efforts to reinvestigate him.
Even though this case was closed, me and Doug would have discussions about the case and different feelings we had. It just bothered us.
Then, 3 years later, Cox attends a blood spatter conference in Louisville, Kentucky.
The thing about blood spatter is they can be considered very esoteric, but it can also be the equivalent of a smoking gun. Here we have...
Cox crosses paths with a leading expert in the field, Tom Bevel. Perhaps this emerging science can shed light on what really happened inside the Winger home on August 29th, 1995.
Let's have a seat. So, tell me about your case.
Some new evidence has come up, and my partner, who's never really believed our conclusions from the beginning, has now got me on his side.
I was informed originally as to the first investigation. I requested an opportunity to look at the clothing, and that was how I got started.
What I want you to do is just send me everything that you've got.
Detectives immediately requisition clothing samples and other evidence from the case for Bevel to examine, but are startled by the news they receive.
Nothing's coming up.
What do you mean nothing's coming up? Try it again.
All the evidence had been signed out by Mr. Michael Metnick, who was the counsel for Mark Winger in the lawsuit against BART Transportation.
Somebody must have put a bug in Mark's ear that he should sue BART Transportation for the loss of his daughter's mother. So the base suit was based on that fact, that Bailey no longer is going to grow up having her mother with her.
When news of Mark Winger's multi-million-dollar suit hits the papers, it's not just Detective Cox and Williamson who are shocked.
Unbelievable.
4 years after Donna Winger's death, the horror of the crime has begun to fade. But not for everyone. After years of silence, Donna's best friend has an explosive story to tell new prosecutor John Schmidt.
Her attorney contacted our office and said that she might have information. Deanne Schultz was suffering from severe depression. Nothing made her better until one day she told her doctor she had to get something off her chest. That is when Deanne Schultz came to our office.
I was Donna Winger's best friend for many years. And her worst enemy. Well, not her worst.
We spoke to Deanne Schultz under a grant of use immunity, meaning what she told us that day could not be used against her as long as she was truthful and gave us full and complete information.
Roger Harrington did not kill Donna Winger.
Then who did?
Mark Winger.
She told us that she was having an affair with Mark Winger.
The prosecutor is informed the relationship started months before Donna's murder and lasted for several months afterward. But according to Schultz, adultery is the least of Mark Winger's sins.
During the course of this affair, Mark expresses his unhappiness to her in his marriage.
I can't stand the sight of her. I just want her gone.
She had a lot of information to provide us that she had kept to herself over the years. She wanted to try to make things as right as she could.
Schultz tells authorities that after Donna's fateful ride home with Roger Harrington, Mark Winger saw a great opportunity.
He felt like things would be better if Donna weren't around. When Roger came on the scene, he was like, oh, it's the perfect solution. It's a gift.
What exactly did he say?
I just gotta get Roger into the house. If I can get him into the house.
But Schultz's long delay in coming forward has detectives wondering just what her role really was.
And why didn't you come to us with this 4 years ago?
Because after she died, he said that if I said anything, then we would both look guilty.
Are you?
She should not have died. She didn't deserve to die, but I did not kill her. Mark Winger did. He killed my best friend.
She was very believable. You could tell it hurt her to tell us this because she's having an affair with her best friend's husband.
That'll be all. We'll be in touch.
Deanne Schultz's testimony is just what detectives need to finally reopen the case. As the investigation becomes official, Winger drops his lawsuit against Bart Transportation. The evidence is returned to police, who soon deliver it to Tom Bevel for examination. His analysis of the alleged perpetrator's clothing raises suspicion.
On Harrington, all of the various bloodstains that I had circled for DNA analysis comes back to him.
It's no surprise blood from Harrington's bullet wound stained his clothing. But if he had bludgeoned Donna Winger, his clothes should have been covered with her blood, too. None is found. Even his footwear shows no damning spots.
His socks and shoes were pristine.
Donna's blood, however, is all over Mark Winger's t-shirt, and not entirely for the reason he gave authorities.
The blood spatter that is found on Mark's shirt, very curious. The very saturated blood staining is certainly not a problem. He says that he held his wife, cradled her, but there is spatter that is getting onto the shirt, and in my opinion, the best explanation here is that spatter is coming from an impact. What we typically refer to is medium velocity blood spatter. That is blood that has received an impact of some sort. That usually produces stains that range from about 2 millimeters up to about 4 millimeters.
According to Bevel, the blood spattered on Mark's shirt is consistent with spatter created from the impact of a hammer blow. Bevel's analysis of crime scene photographs raises further questions.
If you look at the statement that is given by Mr. Winger, what he says is that as he's coming down the hallway, he shoots Harrington. Harrington falls onto his back. Mr. Winger stated he continued running up to him, straddled him, and shot him a second time. Well, the problem with that is that we should only have one blood pool, not two.
The two pools of blood further contradict Winger's testimony.
Roger Harrington was rolled over for the second gunshot. There's two puddles of blood that don't touch each other from the blood that came out of Roger's head. He was face down with blood coming out of the first wound. He was rolled over, causing a gap or a distance of several inches, and he is actually still laying in that very spot when we get there.
When you measure the distance between those two pools of blood, it comes out within a couple inches of how broad Roger Harrington's shoulders are.
And as Detective Cox retrieves the last of the case files from Winger's lawyer, he learns of some shocking new evidence.
Detective?
Yeah?
Did you want these Polaroids?
What Polaroids?
Polaroids. Yes, we want the Polaroids. Because that's the first I heard of them, and I'm thinking, what?
They were in a box.
Sure.
As Cox studies the Polaroids, the truth of the case finally comes into focus.
Officer Dave Behringer was one of the first officers that responded and started taking pictures of the positions of the bodies because he knew that the ambulance and medical personnel was going to dramatically change that scene.
Officer Behringer had left the scene and probably booked those Polaroids into evidence prior to us even leaving the scene. The fact that the case was closed quickly did not allow us to review all of the evidence in the manner we should have.
These photographs offer the only glimpse of how Donna Winger and Roger Harrington were positioned before paramedics moved them to administer first aid. Winger stated he shot Roger Harrington from the hallway, causing Roger to fly backwards, his feet pointing towards Donna. But the Polaroids revealed that Roger was actually lying 180 degrees in the opposite direction, with his feet pointing away from Donna toward the kitchen. The implications are stunning.
We looked at the photographs, including Dave Behringer's 3 Polaroids, and we started to piece the puzzle together, and it was obvious to us that it could not have happened the way that Mark said it did.
I myself and the other investigators didn't pay as close of attention as we probably should have to the exact positions of the body.
This guy's still bleeding.
If the 3 photographs were there when the first arriving detectives get there, I think this case originally takes a different turn.
Detectives finally have their hard proof. Thanks to the forensic evidence, the appearance of the 3 Polaroids, and the damning testimony from his former lover, they now have a clear picture of what really happened at the Winger house on that August day in 1995.
Roger Harrington? I need to talk to you.
He set up a murder. He had indicated to Deanne Schultz that he wanted out of the marriage. He didn't want a divorce. He didn't want maybe to make child support payments. He wanted to figure out a way to kill Donna. He finally figured out, after the Roger Harrington ride on BART transportation, that he could use Roger as a patsy. He called him up, invited him over.
Yes, Mr. Winger. Okay. I'll see you then.
Our community buried Roger Harrington a psychotic killer. And the truth is he wasn't. He was an individual that went there to try to apologize, to get his job back. He wanted his job back so he could continue to live his life. In the car is a note with the address of the Wingers with a time. And you put those things together, it shows that Mark isn't being truthful about who this stranger that just came to his house. He was invited there or lured.
Roger Harrington shows up thinking he's going to have a meeting to apologize. Donna is in the master bedroom with Bailey, totally out of the discussion.
I'm glad we got to speak.
At some point, Mark Winger has Roger go over to the refrigerator where the note is hanging on the refrigerator that Donna had written about the ride with Roger.
I'm really sorry about what happened the other day.
Yeah. So am I.
Whoa, sorry.
Turn around.
I didn't mean for any of this.
Get on your knees.
The first shot in Roger Harrington's head is from the top.
I didn't mean anything. I'm so sorry.
Roger is significantly taller than Mark Winger and had to be on his knees at the time that shot took place. At that point, Donna comes out of the bedroom. She sees that Mark has shot Roger.
Oh my God.
And that's when the first hammer blow hits her head, knocking her down, and he commences to strike 5, 6, 7, or 8 times as she's down. At that point, he actually has to step over Roger Harrington's body to get to the phone to call 911.
Check the police. Yes, hold me. What's the problem?
Somebody tried to kill my wife.
And as he's talking to 911, you can actually hear in the background of the 911 call, Roger Harrington is still alive and breathing.
Is he dead?
I don't know. He's making weird sounds.
The dispatcher says, "Is the person dead that you have just shot?"
Slow down. I can't understand you. Is the man still in your house?
My baby's crying. My baby's crying. I gotta go. I'll call you right back.
At that point, Mark says, "My baby's crying. I've got to go," and he hangs up the phone. We know that Roger Harrington was rolled over, and then the second gunshot goes through his forehead. It goes through and through, straight into the carpet and into the flooring, and he is actually still laying in that very spot when we get there.
He grabbed the hammer and struck Mr. Harrington in the chest twice, which would explain why his prints are on it.
Please, just let me get to my wife.
Mark Winger then pressed his dying wife's head wound against his T-shirt, perhaps attempting to saturate it and conceal blood spatter.
He had a lot of blood on his clothing, and Roger Harrington had very little. He thought his story out pretty good, but he just didn't know how much forensics could do with the evidence. It was a very integral part in proving that he had done what he had done.
The most important elements of this case were the 3 Polaroid pictures Officer Dave Behringer took. They showed us the positions of the bodies, the blood spatter analysis, and the testimony of D.N. Schultz. Put together are all the circumstances that come together beyond a reasonable doubt.
Almost 7 years after the slayings, Winger is found guilty of murdering his wife and Roger Harrington. He's sentenced to life behind bars.
I want people to be aware of the brutality that can happen in a home of an upper middle class couple. Everybody around them is just a loving, wonderful couple, but we never know what goes on behind closed doors.
I still think about this case on a daily basis. It still affects the way that I do my job. It affects the way that others do their job here at the Springfield Police Department.
Charlie, Doug, they took a second look at the case. They kept developing the leads. They kept following the evidence and letting it take them to where it went. And that's the hallmark of a good police officer.
The rush to judgment has haunted Detective Charlie Cox ever since.
I'm most proud of the fact that I had a partner as good as Doug, that he didn't allow it to just rest, that I was man enough to admit I was wrong. I learned a lot on this case. It's helped me to be a better detective and a better investigator overall. Because of the mistakes I made, they could have been catastrophic, and I won't never let that happen again.